What happens when a billionaire disguises himself as a homeless man to test people's kindness? That's exactly what Daniel Carter wanted to find out. One of the wealthiest men in the country, Daniel had spent years building his empire. But somewhere along the way, he started questioning who people really were. Did they only respect him because of his money? Did kindness still exist in a world obsessed with wealth? There was only one way to find out. Daniel stepped onto the bustling city streets, completely unrecognizable. His tailored suits were gone, replaced by torn, dirty clothes. His sleek haircut was hidden beneath a matted beanie, and his usual confident stride had been reduced to the uncertain steps of a man who had lost everything. He had spent thousands of dollars making this disguise perfect. Now, all he had to do was wait. The first person he approached was a businessman in a navy blue suit. "Excuse me, sir," Daniel said, lowering his voice to sound weaker. "I haven't eaten all day. Do you have anything to spare?" The man barely looked at him. "Get a job," he muttered before walking away. Daniel clenched his jaw. He turned to a woman sipping an expensive coffee. "Ma'am, don't talk to me." She pulled her purse closer. Again and again, Daniel tried. A college student ignored him. A couple laughed as they passed. A cafe owner shooed him away from the entrance. No one even bothered to ask if he was okay. By the end of the day, his stomach growled painfully. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter, the billionaire, was starving. He sat on a cold bench, watching people rush home, wrapped in warm coats, carrying bags of food. They walked past him like he didn't exist. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be invisible. Just as he was about to give up, a voice broke through the night. "Hey man, you okay?" Daniel looked up. Standing in front of him was a homeless man, holding a small paper bag. His clothes were just as worn as Daniel's disguise. His face was lined with exhaustion. But his eyes? His eyes were filled with something Daniel hadn't seen all day. Compassion. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. No one had spoken to him with kindness all day. The man standing before him looked like he had nothing to give, yet he was offering something anyway. "Here," the man said, holding out the small paper bag. Daniel hesitated. I can't take that. You need it more than I do." The man chuckled dryly. "We both need it, buddy. But you look like you haven't eaten in a while." Daniel's stomach growled loudly, betraying him. The man grinned and sat beside him. "Name's Jake, by the way. Let's split it." Daniel opened the bag, his heart tightening. Inside was a half-eaten sandwich. It wasn't much, but to a man who had nothing, this was everything. "Why would you do this?" Daniel asked, his voice quieter than before. Jake shrugged, taking a small bite of his share. "Because I know what it's like to be hungry." Daniel studied him. "How long have you been out here?" Jake's jaw tightened. 2 years. Daniel's stomach twisted. "What happened?" Jake exhaled, staring at the pavement. "Lost my job. Then my apartment. One bad thing after another, you know? Next thing I knew, I was here." Daniel frowned. "But why haven't you gotten back on your feet?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "You think it's that easy? Nobody gives guys like me a second chance. No address, no job. No job, no address. It's a cycle, man. People walk past you like you don't exist. Like you're not even human." Daniel felt those words deep in his chest. He had just spent one day living this reality. Jake had been here for 2 years. They ate in silence. For the first time in a long time, Daniel wasn't thinking about business deals or investments. He was just a man, sharing a meal with another man who had been forgotten by the world. But Daniel wouldn't forget. Not after this. Tomorrow, Jake's life was about to change forever, and he didn't even know it yet. Jake leaned back on the bench, stretching his arms. "Man, it's been a while since I've had company." Daniel studied him carefully. Even after 2 years on the streets, Jake wasn't bitter. He had every reason to hate the world, but instead, he had chosen kindness. And that That was worth more than all the money Daniel had. So what did you do before all this? Daniel asked. Jake smiled wistfully. Worked at a warehouse. Tough job, long hours, but it paid the bills. What happened? Jake sighed. Company downsized. I was the first to go. Took me a while to find another job, but when you can't pay rent, landlords don't care about your situation. Lost my place. Then my car. After that, it's like people stop seeing you. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. This man hadn't failed. The system had failed him. Jake glanced at him, smirking. What about you? What's your story? Daniel hesitated. Nothing special, he lied. Jake laughed. Well, at least you're still fighting. That's what matters. Daniel exhaled slowly. Yeah, fighting. But deep down, he knew. Jake was the real fighter here. As they finished their meal, Jake stood and dusted off his worn-out jeans. All right, man. Stay warm out here, all right? Daniel watched as he turned to leave. This was it. This was his chance. Wait. Jake paused. Come back to this bench tomorrow. Same time. Jake frowned. Why? Daniel forced a small smile. Let's just say, I have a feeling things are about to change. Jake chuckled. All right, mystery man. I'll see you tomorrow. He walked away, disappearing into the night. And Daniel? Daniel had never been more certain of a decision in his life. Tomorrow, he was going to change Jake's world. The next day, Jake sat on the same bench, hands buried in his jacket pockets. It was cold, colder than usual, and Daniel was late. Figures, Jake muttered to himself. He had been stupid to believe a stranger would actually come back. This was just another false hope, like all the others. He sighed, about to leave, when suddenly, a black luxury car pulled up to the curb. Jake froze. The back door swung open, and a man stepped out. A man in a perfectly tailored suit. A man with neatly combed hair. A man Jake barely recognized. But then, he saw the eyes, and realization hit him like a truck. No way, Jake whispered. The stranger from yesterday was not homeless. Daniel smirked. Told you things were about to change. Jake stumbled back. Who are you? Let's take a ride. Jake hesitated. Everything inside him screamed this was insane. But something about Daniel told him. This was real. With a deep breath, Jake stepped into the car. And in that moment, his life was never going to be the same. Jake sat stiffly in the back of the luxury car, his hands gripping his worn-out jacket. The seats were softer than anything he had touched in years. The scent of leather and expensive cologne filled the air. Everything felt unreal. Where are we going? Jake asked cautiously. Daniel simply smiled. You'll see. The car weaved through the city, passing skyscrapers and bustling streets. Jake recognized none of it. These were places he had only ever seen from a distance. The part of town where men in suits lived, not guys like him. Finally, the car pulled into a towering glass building. Jake's heart pounded. He had passed this place before. This was Carter Enterprises, one of the biggest corporations in the country. His mouth went dry. No way, he muttered. But Daniel simply stepped out of the car, motioning for Jake to follow. Inside, the lobby was massive. Employees in business attire moved around with purpose, heels clicking against marble floors. Everywhere Jake looked, people glanced at him, some in confusion, others in judgment. Sir, should I escort this man out? A security guard asked. Daniel chuckled. No need. He's my guest. Jake stared. Guest? What the hell was happening? They stepped into a private elevator. As the doors closed, Jake turned to Daniel. Who are you? Daniel exhaled. I should have told you sooner. Jake waited, his stomach twisting. Daniel turned to face him, his blue eyes sharp. My name is Daniel Carter. I own this company. Jake's breath caught in his throat. You're the billionaire? Daniel smirked. Surprise. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open, revealing a massive office with a breathtaking view of the city. And in that moment, Jake realized this wasn't just some act of kindness. Something huge was about to happen. Jake stepped cautiously into the massive office. The floor-to-ceiling windows made the entire city look small. The desk was polished. The chairs looked like they cost more than a car. Everything screamed power and wealth. And yet, Jake still couldn't wrap his head around it. "Why am I here?" he asked. Daniel leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Because I owe you." Jake frowned. "Owe me? For what?" Daniel smiled. "For that sandwich." Jake let out a disbelieving laugh. "Man, I gave you half a sandwich. That's not worth all this." Daniel's face turned serious. "You don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" "You were the only person who showed me kindness when you had nothing to give." Jake fell silent. "I spent one day as a homeless man. You've lived it for 2 years. And in those 2 years, you never lost your humanity." Daniel took a step forward. "That's the kind of man I want in my company." Jake froze. What are you saying?" Daniel smirked. "I'm offering you a job, Jake." Jake stared. His heart pounded. This had to be a joke. "You don't even know if I can do the job." "I know enough." Daniel sat at his desk, picking up a folder. "You worked in a warehouse, right? You were a good worker. Dependable. Honest. That's all I need to know." He slid the folder across the desk. "This is a contract. If you want it, the job is yours." Jake swallowed hard. This was too much. 2 days ago, he was just another forgotten soul on the streets. Now, a billionaire was offering him a way out. His hands trembled as he reached for the folder. But then, he hesitated. "Why me?" he whispered. Daniel's expression softened. "Because I believe in second chances." Jake clenched his jaw. For the first time in 2 years, someone believed in him. Jake's hands shook as he held the contract. The letters on the page blurred together. This was real. A real job. A real salary. A chance to start over. But instead of excitement, all he felt was fear. "I don't know if I can do this," Jake admitted. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jake exhaled sharply. "I've been out of work for years. What if I mess up? What if I don't belong here?" Daniel leaned forward. "Jake, do you think you belonged on the streets?" Jake froze. Daniel continued. "You ended up there because life threw you down, not because you deserved it. And you sure as hell don't deserve to stay there." Jake's chest tightened. Daniel's voice softened. "I'm not giving you a handout, Jake. I'm giving you a chance. You earned this the moment you chose kindness over survival." Jake swallowed hard. The streets had taught him to expect nothing from anyone. But Daniel Carter was offering him everything. And for the first time in years, he wanted to believe it was real. Slowly, Jake picked up the pen. His fingers trembled as he signed his name. Daniel smiled. "Welcome to the team." And just like that, Jake wasn't homeless anymore. The next morning, Jake stood in front of a full-length mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize himself. Gone were the torn clothes. Gone was the exhaustion in his face. Instead, he wore a clean, fitted suit. His hair was freshly cut, his beard trimmed, and for the first time in forever, he felt human again. A knock on the door made him jump. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Not bad," he said with a smirk. Jake chuckled, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. "Feels weird. You'll get used to it." Daniel tossed him a keycard. "Your new apartment. It's yours as long as you work here." Jake's breath caught. "You got me a place to stay?" Daniel shrugged. "Can't have one of my employees sleeping on a bench." Jake stared at the key. It wasn't just a place to stay. It was a chance to rebuild his life. His throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you." Daniel patted his shoulder. "Just prove me right, Jake." Jake nodded. And with that, he stepped out the door, ready to face his first day in his new life. Jake walked into the corporate office, feeling completely out of place. Everyone around him looked polished, confident, important. And then there was him, a man who, just yesterday, was sleeping on a bench. He tried to ignore the stares. The whispers. Who is that guy? Why is he here? I heard Mr. Carter hired him personally. Jake kept his head down, gripping his employee badge like a lifeline. This was his chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. A supervisor named Mark approached him. All right, Jake. You'll be working in logistics. Simple stuff, tracking shipments, organizing deliveries. Think you can handle it? Jake nodded. Yeah, I used to work in a warehouse. I know how this goes. Mark raised an eyebrow. We'll see. Jake could tell. This guy didn't believe in him. But that was fine, because Jake was ready to prove them all wrong. For the next few hours, he focused harder than ever. He studied the system. He organized reports. And when a major shipment error almost cost the company thousands, Jake fixed it before anyone else noticed. Mark watched in shock. How did you catch that? Jake shrugged. Warehouse experience. Mark didn't say anything. But for the first time, he looked at Jake with respect. At the end of the day, Daniel stopped by. So, how was your first day? Jake exhaled. Honestly, tough. Daniel smirked. But you handled it. Jake grinned. Yeah, I did. And for the first time in years. He felt proud of himself. A week later, Jake sat at his desk, typing away. He was focused, confident. He belonged here. And for the first time in years, he believed it, too. Daniel walked in, hands in his pockets. Got a minute? Jake nodded. They stepped into Daniel's office, the city skyline stretching behind them. Daniel leaned against his desk, studying Jake. You've done good here, Jake. Jake smiled. Feels good to be back on my feet. Daniel chuckled. You're more than back. You're thriving. Jake exhaled, his heart full. I never thought I'd get a second chance. Daniel shook his head. You didn't just get a second chance, Jake. You earned it. Jake swallowed hard. How do I ever repay you for this? Daniel's smile softened. By doing for someone else what I did for you. Jake froze. Daniel crossed his arms. There are more people out there like you. People who need a break. People who deserve one. When the time comes, will you help them? Jake didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Daniel nodded, satisfied. As Jake stood to leave, he paused at the door. Hey, Daniel. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Yeah. Jake smiled. Thanks for seeing me when no one else did. Daniel grinned. The world may have looked past you, Jake, but I never will. And with that, Jake walked out, ready to start his new life. A life he would never take for granted again.